That keeps us going. Late in the evening, I showed Desert Rose the bed where she would sleep. And when she fell asleep immediately, I returned to the main room, where I found Rumi and Shams talking. "You should come to our performance," Shams said when he saw me coming. "What performance?" I asked. "A spiritual dance, Kara, the likes of which you have never seen." I looked at my husband in astonishment. What was going on? What dance were they talking about? "Maulana, you are a respected scholar, not an entertainer. What will people think of you?" I asked, feeling my face growing hot. "Don't you worry," Rumi said. "Shams and I have been talking about this for a long time. We want to introduce the dance of the whirling dervishes. It is called the Sema. Whoever yearns for divine love is more than welcome to join us." My head started to ache madly, but the pain was slight compared to the torment in my heart. "What if people don't like it?" "Not everyone thinks highly of dance," I said to Shams, hoping this would have the effect of stopping whatever he was about to say next. "At least consider postponing this performance." "Not everyone thinks highly of God," Shams said without missing a beat. "Are we going to postpone believing in Him, too?" And that was the end of the argument. There were no more words to exchange, and the sound of the wind filled the house, bursting through the slats in the walls and pounding in my ears. Sultan Walid. Konya, June 1246. "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder," Shams kept saying. "Everybody will watch the same dance, but each will see it differently. So why worry? Some will like it, some won't." Yet on the evening of the Sema, I told Shams I was worried that nobody would show up. "Don't worry," he said forcefully. "The townspeople might not like me, they might not even be fond of your father anymore, but they cannot possibly ignore us. Their curiosity will bring them here." And just so, on the evening of the performance, I found the open-air hall packed. There were merchants, blacksmiths, carpenters, peasants, stonecutters, dye-makers, medicine vendors, guild masters, clerks, potters, bakers, mourners, soothsayers, rat-catchers, perfume sellers. Even Sheikh Yasin had come with a group of students. Women were sitting in the rear. I was relieved to see the sovereign Kakasrov sitting with his advisors in the front row. That a man of such a high rank supported my father would keep tongues quiet. It took a long time for the members of the audience to settle down, and even after they had, the noise inside didn't fully subside and there remained a murmur of heated gossip. In my itch to sit next to someone who would not speak ill of Shams, I sat next to Suleiman the drunk. The man reeked of wine, but I didn't mind. My legs were jumpy, my palms sweaty, and though the air was warm enough for us to take off our cloaks, my teeth chattered. This performance was so important for my father's declining reputation. I prayed to God, but since I didn't know what exactly to ask for, other than things turning out all right, my prayer sounded too lame. Shortly there came a sound, first from far away, and then it drew nearer. It was so captivating and moving that all held their breath, listening. "What kind of an instrument is this?" Suleiman whispered with a mixture of awe and delight. "It is called the knee," I said, remembering a conversation between my father and Shams. "And its sound is the sigh of the lover for the beloved." When the knee abated, my father appeared on stage. With measured, soft steps, he approached and greeted the audience. 6 dervishes followed him, all my father's disciples, all wearing long white garments with large skirts. They crossed their hands on their chests, bowing in front of my father to get his blessing. Then the music started, and, one by one, the dervishes began to spin, first slowly, then with breathtaking speed, their skirts opening up like lotus flowers. It was quite a scene. I couldn't help but smile with pride and joy. Out of the corner of my eye, I checked the reaction of the audience. Even the nastiest gossipers were watching the performance with visible admiration. The dervishes whirled and whirled for what seemed like an eternity. Then the music rose, the sound of a rebab from behind a curtain catching up with the knee and the drums. And that was when Shams of Tabriz entered the stage, like the wild desert wind. Wearing a darker robe than everyone else and looking taller, he was also spinning faster. His hands were wide open toward the sky, as was his face, like a sunflower in search of the sun. I heard many people in the audience gasp with awe. Even those who hated Shams of Tabriz seemed to have fallen under the spell of the moment. I glanced at my father. While Shams spun in a frenzy and the disciples whirled more slowly in their orbits, my father remained as still as an old oak tree, wise and calm, his lips constantly moving in prayer. Finally the music slowed down. All at once the dervishes stopped whirling, each lotus flower closing up into itself. With a tender salute, my father blessed everyone on stage and in the audience, and for a moment it was as if we were all connected in perfect harmony. A thick, sudden silence ensued. Nobody knew how to react. Nobody had seen anything like this before. My father's voice pierced the silence. This, my friends, is called the Sima, the dance of the whirling dervishes. From this day on, dervishes of every age will dance the Sima. One hand pointed up to the sky, the other hand pointing down to earth. Every speck of love we receive from God, we pledge to distribute to the people. The audience smiled and mumbled in agreement. There was a warm, friendly commotion all over the hall. I was so touched by seeing this affirming response that tears welled up in my eyes. At long last my father and Shams were beginning to receive the respect and love that they most certainly deserved. The evening could have ended on that warm note and I could have gone home a happy man, feeling confident that things were improving, had it not been for what happened next, ruining everything. Suleiman the Drunk. Konya, June 1246. Blood and Thunder. What an unforgettable evening! I still have not recovered from its effects. And of all the things that I have witnessed tonight, the most startling was the finale. After the Sima, the great Kakasrov too stood up, his eyes ranging round the room imperiously. In consummate smugness he approached the stage, and after giving a great whoop of laughter, he said, "Congratulations, dervishes! I was impressed by your performance." Rumi gracefully thanked him, and all the dervishes on stage did the same. Then the musicians stood up together and greeted the sovereign with ultimate respect. His face brimming with satisfaction, Kakasrov signaled to one of his guards, who immediately handed him a velvet pouch. Kakasrov bounced the pouch in his palm several times to show how heavy it was with golden coins and then flung it onto the stage. People around me sighed and applauded. So deeply were we moved by the generosity of our ruler. Content and confident, Kakasrov turned to leave. But no sooner had he taken a step toward the exit than the very pouch he flung on the stage was tossed back at him. The coins landed under his feet, jingling like a new bride's bracelets. Everything had happened so fast that for a full minute we all stood still and perplexed, unable to make sense of what was going on. But no doubt the one who was most shocked was Kakasrov himself. The insult was so obvious and definitely too personal to be forgivable. He looked over his shoulder with unbelieving eyes to see who could have done such a horrible thing. It was Shams of Tabriz. All heads turned toward him as he stood on stage, arms akimbo, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "We don't dance for money," he boomed in a deep voice. "The Sima is a spiritual dance performed for love and love alone. So take back your gold, sovereign. Your money is no good here." A dreadful silence descended upon the hall. Rumi's elder son looked so shaken that all the blood had been drained from his young face. Nobody dared to make a sound. Without a sigh, Without a gasp, we all held our breaths. As if the skies had been waiting for this signal, it started to rain, sharp and stinging. The raindrops drowned everything and everyone in their steady sound. "Let us go!" Kakasrov yelled to his men. His cheeks wobbling with humiliation, his lips quivering uncontrollably, and his shoulders visibly slumped, the sovereign headed for the exit. His many guards and servants scurried behind him one by one, stomping on the spilled coins on the floor with their heavy boots. People rushed to scoop up the coins, pushing and pulling one another. As soon as the sovereign had left, a murmur of disapproval and disappointment rippled through the audience. "Who does he think he is?" some people burst out. "How dare he insult our ruler?" others joined in. "What if Kakasrov makes the whole town pay the price now?" A group of people stood up, shaking their heads in disbelief, and stalked toward the exit in a clear sign of protest. At the head of the protesters were Sheikh Yasin and his students. To my great surprise, I noticed among them two of Rumi's old disciples and his own son Aladdin. Aladdin. Konya, June 1246. By Allah, I had never been so embarrassed in my life. As if it weren't shameful enough to see my own father in cahoots with a heretic, I had to suffer the mortification of watching him lead a dance performance. How could he disgrace himself like that in front of the whole town? On top of this, I was utterly appalled when I heard there was among the audience a harlot from the brothel. As I sat there wondering how much more madness and destruction my father's love for Shams could cause us all, for the first time in my life I wished to be the son of another man. To me the entire performance was sheer sacrilege. But what happened afterward was far beyond the pale. How could that insolent man find the nerve to pour scorn on our ruler? He is very lucky that Kakasrov didn't have him arrested on the spot and sent to the gallows. When I saw Sheikh Yasin walk out after Kakasrov, I knew I had to do the same. The last thing I wanted was for the townspeople to think that I was on the side of a heretic. Everyone had to see once and for all that, unlike my brother, I wasn't my father's puppet. That night I didn't go home. I stayed at Irshad's house with a few friends. Overcome with emotion, we talked about the day's events and discussed at great length what to do. "That man is a terrible influence on your father," said Irshad tautly. "And now he has brought a prostitute into your house. You need to clean your family's name, Aladdin." As I stood listening to the things they said, my face burning with a scalding shame, one thing was clear to me: Shams had brought us nothing but misery. In unison we reached the conclusion that Shams had to leave this town, if not willingly, then by force. The next day I went back home determined to talk to Shams of Tabriz man to man. I found him alone in the courtyard, playing the knee, his head bowed, his eyes closed, his back turned to me. Fully immersed in his music, he hadn't noticed my presence. I approached as quiet as a mouse, taking the opportunity to observe him and get to know my enemy better. After what seemed like several minutes, the music stopped. Shams raised his head slightly, and without looking in my direction, he mumbled flatly, as if talking to himself, "Hey there, Aladdin, were you looking for me?" I didn't say a word. Knowing of his ability to see through closed doors, it didn't surprise me that he had eyes in the back of his head. "So did you enjoy the performance yesterday?" Shams asked, now turning his face toward mine. "I thought it was disgraceful," I answered at once. "Let us get something straight, shall we? I don't like you. I never have. And I'm not going to let you ruin my father's reputation any more than you have already." A spark flickered in his eyes as Shams put his knee aside and said, "Is that what this is about? If Rumi's reputation is ruined, people won't look up to you as the son of an eminent man anymore. Does that scare you?" Determined not to let him get under my skin, I ignored his mordant remarks. "Still, it was a while before I could say anything. "Why don't you go and leave us in peace? We were so good before you came," I shot back. "My father is a respected scholar and a family man. You two have nothing in common." His neck craned forward, his brow furrowed in mighty concentration. Shams drew in a deep breath. Suddenly he looked old and vulnerable. It flashed through my mind that I could slug him, beat him to a pulp, before anyone could run to his rescue. The thought was so dreadful and malevolent, and yet frighteningly seducing, that I had to avert my eyes. When I stared back at him, I found Shams inspecting me, his gaze avid, bright. Could he be reading my mind? A creepy feeling got hold of me, spreading from my hands to my feet, as if I were being pricked by 1,000 needles, and my knees felt wobbly, unwilling to carry me. It must have been black magic. I had no doubt that Shams excelled in the darkest forms of sorcery. "You are scared of me, Aladdin," Shams said after a pause. "You know who you remind me of, the cross-eyed assistant." "What are you talking about?" I said. "It's a story." "Do you like stories?" I shrugged. "I have no time for them." A flicker of condescension crossed Shams's lips. "A man who has no time for stories is a man who has no time for God," he said. "Don't you know that God is the best storyteller?" And without waiting for me to say anything, he told me this story. Once there was an artisan who had a bitter assistant, who was cross-eyed to boot. This assistant always saw double. One day the artisan asked him to bring a jar of honey from storage. The assistant came back empty-handed. "But, master, there are 2 jars of honey there," he complained. "Which one do you want me to bring?" Knowing his assistant too well, the artisan said, "Why don't you break one of the jars and bring me the other one?" Alas, the assistant was too shallow to understand the wisdom behind these words. He did as told. He broke one of the jars and was very surprised to see the other one break, too. "What are you trying to tell me?" I asked. To display my temper in front of Shams was a mistake, but I couldn't help it. "You and your stories. Damn it! Can't you ever talk straight?" "But it is so clear, Aladdin. I am telling you that like the cross-eyed assistant you see dualities everywhere," Shams said. "Your father and I are one. If you break me, you'll break him as well." "You and my father have nothing in common," I riposted. "If I break the second jar, I'll set the first one free." I was so full of rage and resentment that I didn't consider the ramifications of my words. Not then. Not until much later. Not until it was too late. Shams. Konya, June 1246. By and large, the narrow-minded say that dancing is sacrilege. They think God gave us music, not only the music we make with our voices and instruments but the music underlying all forms of life, and then He forbade our listening to it. Don't they see that all nature is singing? Everything in this universe moves with a rhythm: the pumping of the heart, the flaps of a bird's wings, the wind on a stormy night, a blacksmith working iron, or the sounds an unborn baby is surrounded with inside the womb. Everything partakes, passionately and spontaneously, in one magnificent melody. The dance of the whirling dervishes is a link in that perpetual chain. Just as a drop of sea water carries within it the entire ocean, our dance both reflects and shrouds the secrets of the cosmos. Hours before the performance, Rumi and I retreated into a quiet room to meditate. The 6 dervishes who were going to whirl in the evening joined us. Together we performed our ablutions and prayed. Then we donned our costumes. Earlier we had talked at great length about what the proper attire should be and had chosen simple fabric and colors of the earth. The honey-colored hat symbolized the tombstone, the long white skirt the shroud, and the black cloak the grave. Our dance projected how Sufis discard the entire self, like shedding a piece of old skin. Before leaving the hall for the stage, Rumi recited a poem. The Gnostic has escaped from the five senses and the six directions and makes you aware of what is beyond them. With those feelings we were ready. First came the sound of the knee. Then Rumi entered the stage in his capacity as Samazanbashi. One by one, the dervishes followed him, their heads bowed in modesty. The last to appear had to be the sheikh. As firmly as I resisted the suggestion, Rumi insisted on my performing that part tonight. T. Hafiz chanted a verse from the Quran, "There are certainly signs on earth for people with certainty, and in yourselves as well. Do you not see?" Then started the Qudam accompanying the piercing sound of knee and rebab. Listen to the reed and the tale it tells, how it sings of separation. Ever since they cut me from the reed bed, my wail has caused men and women to weep. Giving himself over to the hands of God, the first dervish started to whirl, the hems of his skirts gently swishing with a separate life of their own. We all joined in and whirled until there remained around us nothing but oneness. Whatever we received from the skies, we passed on to the earth, from God to people. Each and every one of us became a link connecting the lover to the beloved. When the music ceased, we jointly bowed to the essential forces of the universe, fire, wind, earth, and water, and the fifth element, the void. I don't regret what transpired between me and Kakasrov at the end of the performance. But I am sorry for putting Rumi in a difficult position. As a man who has always enjoyed privilege and protection, he has never before felt estranged from a ruler. Now he has at least a smattering of insight into something that average people experience all the time: the deep, vast rift between the ruling elite and the masses. And with that, I suppose I am nearing the end of my time in Konya. Every true love and friendship is a story of unexpected transformation. If we are the same person before and after we loved, that means we haven't loved enough. With the initiation of poetry, music, and dance, a huge part of Rumi's transformation is complete. Once a rigid scholar who disliked poetry and a preacher who enjoyed the sound of his own voice as he lectured others, Rumi is now turning into a poet himself, becoming the voice of pure emptiness, though he might not have realized this fully yet. As for me, I, too, have changed and am changing. I am moving from being into nothingness. From one season to another, one stage to the next, from life to death. Our friendship was a blessing, a gift from God. We thrived, rejoiced, bloomed, and basked in each other's company, savoring absolute fullness and felicity. I remembered what Baba Zaman once told me. For the silk to prosper, the silkworm had to die. Sitting there all alone in the whirling hall after everyone had left and the hubbub had died away, I knew that my time with Rumi was coming to an end. Through our companionship, Rumi and I had experienced an exceptional beauty and learned what it was like to encounter infinity through two mirrors reflecting each other endlessly. But the old maxim still applies: where there is love, there is bound to be heartache. Ella. Northampton, June 29, 2008. Beyond wildest dreams, Aziz said, strange things happened to people when they were ready for the unusual and the unexpected. But not a single bone in Ella's body was ready for the one strange thing that happened this week. Aziz Zahara came to Boston to see her. It was Sunday evening. The Rubinsteins had just sat down to eat when Ella noticed a text message on her cell phone. Assuming that it must be from someone at the Fusion Cooking Club, she didn't hurry to check it. Instead, she served the evening's specialty, honey roasted duck with sautéed potatoes and caramelized onions on a bed of brown rice. When she placed the duck on the table, everyone perked up. Even Jeanette, who was depressed after seeing Scott with his new girlfriend and realizing she still loved him, seemed ravenous. It was a long, languid dinner, peppered with good wine and the usual talk. Ella was privy to every conversation at the table. With her husband she discussed having the gazebo repainted a bright blue, with Jeanette she chatted about her busy schedule at college, and with the twins she talked about renting some new DVDs, including the latest Pirates of the Caribbean. Only after she had placed the dirty dishes in the dishwasher and served the white chocolate creme brulee did it occur to her to check the message on her cell phone. "Hi, Ella, I'm in Boston on an assignment for Smithsonian Magazine. Just got off the plane. Would you like to meet? I'm staying at the Onyx and would love to see you, Aziz." Ella put the phone away and took her place at the dinner table for dessert, feeling slightly dizzy. "You got a message?" David asked, raising his head from his plate. "Yes, it's from Michelle," Ella answered without a moment's hesitation. Turning his anguished face away, David dabbed his mouth and then, with amazing slowness and precision, folded his napkin into a perfect square. "I see," he said when he was done. Ella knew that her husband didn't believe her, not in the least, and yet she also felt she had to stick with her story, not to convince her husband or deceive her children but for herself, to make it possible for her to take that one step from her house to Aziz's hotel. So she continued, measuring each word. "She called to tell me there's going to be a meeting tomorrow morning at the agency to discuss next year's catalog. She wants me to join them." "Well, you should go, then," said David with a flicker in his eyes that indicated he, too, was in on the game. "Why don't I give you a ride in the morning, and we could go there together? I could reschedule a few appointments." Ella stared at her husband, aghast. What was he trying to do? Did he want to make a scene in front of the kids? "That'd be lovely," she said, forcing herself to smile. "But we're going to need to leave the house before 7 a.m. Michelle says she wants to talk to me in private before the others join in." "Oh, forget it, then," Orly chimed in, knowing how much her father detested waking up early. Daddy could never get up in time. Now Ella and David looked at each other, locking into a level gaze over the heads of their children, each waiting for the other one to make the first move. "That's true," David conceded finally. Ella nodded with relief, though she felt a slight flush of shame at her audacity, because at that moment she had another idea, a bolder one. "Yes, it is awfully early. In fact," she said, "why don't I go now?" The thought of going to Boston tomorrow morning and having breakfast with Aziz was enough to make her heart beat faster. Yet she wanted to see Aziz right away, now rather than tomorrow, which all of a sudden felt too far away. It was almost a 2-hour drive from her house to Boston, but she didn't mind. He had come all the way from Amsterdam for her. She could certainly drive 2 hours. "I could be in Boston before 10 tonight. And tomorrow I could be at the agency early enough to see Michelle before the meeting." A shadow of agony crossed David's face. It seemed an eternity before he could say anything. In that long moment, his eyes were the eyes of a man who had neither the strength nor the emotion left in him to stop his wife from going to another man. "I can drive to Boston tonight, and stay in our apartment," Ella said, seemingly to her children but in truth only to David. That was her way of assuring her husband there would be no physical contact between her and whomever he assumed she was going to meet. David rose from his chair with a glass of wine in his hand. Giving a sweeping gesture in the direction of the door, he smiled at Ella with assurance and added, a bit too eagerly, "All right, honey, if that's what you want, you should go now." "But, Mom, I thought you were going to help me with math this evening," Abby objected. Ella felt her face burn. "I know, dear. Why don't we do that tomorrow?" "Oh, let her go." Orly turned to her brother teasingly. "You don't need your mama by your side all the time. When are you going to grow up?" Abby frowned but said nothing further. Orly was supportive. Jeanette didn't care one way or the other, and just like that, Ella grabbed her cell phone and dashed upstairs. As soon as she closed the bedroom door, she threw herself onto the bed and text messaged Aziz. "I can't believe you're here. I'll be at the Onyx in 2 hours." She stared at her phone in growing panic as she watched her message being sent. What was she doing? But there was no time to think. If she was going to regret this evening, which she suspected she might, she could regret it later. Now she needed to hurry. It took her 20 minutes to jump into the shower, blow dry her hair, brush her teeth, choose a dress, take it off, try another dress, then another, comb her hair, put on some makeup, look for the small earrings Grandma Ruth had given her on her 18th birthday, and change her dress again. Taking in a deep breath, she put on some perfume. Eternity by Calvin Klein. The bottle had been waiting in the bathroom cabinet for ages. David had never been fond of perfume. He said women should smell like women, not like vanilla beans or cinnamon sticks. But European men might have a different take on this, Ella assumed. Wasn't perfume a big thing in Europe when she was done? She inspected the woman in the mirror. Why hadn't he told her he was coming? If she'd known, she would have gone to a hairdresser, gotten a manicure, had a facial, and perhaps tried a new hairstyle. What if Aziz didn't like her? What if there was no chemistry between them and he regretted coming all the way to Boston all at once? She came to her senses. Why did she want to change her looks? What difference would it make whether there was chemistry between them or not? Any adventure with this man was bound to be ephemeral. She had a family. She had a life. Her past was here, and so was her future. Annoyed with herself for indulging in such unlikely scenarios, she closed down her mind, which always proved easier. At 7:45, Ella kissed her children goodnight and left the house. David was nowhere to be seen. As she walked toward her car, jingling the keys to the apartment in Boston in her hand, her mind was still numb, but her heart raced. Part 5. The Void. The things that are present through their absence. Sultan Walid. Konya, July 1246. Breathing with difficulty and barely able to stand straight, my father came to my room, looking like a shadow of the man he used to be. There were bags under his eyes, dark and ominous, as if he had stayed awake all night. But what surprised me most was that his beard had gone white. "My son, help me," he said in a voice that didn't sound like him. I ran to him and grabbed his arm. "Anything, father, just ask for it." He was silent for a minute, as though crushed under the weight of what he was going to say next. "Shams is gone. He has left me." For the briefest of moments, I was awash with confusion and a strange sense of relief, but of that I said nothing. Sad and shocked though I was, it also occurred to me that this could be for the best. Wouldn't life be easier and more tranquil now? My father had gained many enemies lately, all because of Shams. I wanted things to get back to how they were before he came. Could Aladdin be right? Weren't we all better off without Shams? "Don't forget how much he means to me," my father said as if he sensed my thoughts. "He and I are one. The same moon has a bright and a dark side. Shams is my unruly side." I nodded, feeling ashamed. My heart sank. My father didn't have to say more. I had never seen so much suffering in a man's eyes. My tongue felt heavy in my mouth. I couldn't speak for a while. "I want you to find Shams, that is, of course, if he wants to be found. Bring him back. Tell him how my heart aches." My father's voice dropped to a whisper. "Tell him his absence is killing me." I promised him I would bring Shams back. His hand gripped mine and squeezed it with such gratitude that I had to avert my gaze, for I didn't want him to see the indecision in my eyes. I spent the whole week roaming the streets of Konya, hoping to trace the footsteps of Shams. By this time everyone in town had heard he had disappeared, and there was much speculation as to his whereabouts. I met a leper who loved Shams immensely. He directed me to many desperate and unfortunate people whom the wandering dervish had helped. I never knew there were so many who loved Shams, since they were the kind of people who had been invisible to me till now. One evening I came home feeling tired and disoriented. Kara brought me a bowl of rice pudding, fragrant with the essence of roses. She sat down next to me and watched me eat, her smile framed by crescents of anguish. I couldn't help noticing how much she had aged this past year. I heard you were trying to bring Shams back. Do you know where he has gone? She asked. There are rumors he might have gone to Damascus. But I also heard people say he headed to Isfahan, Cairo, or even Tabriz, the city of his birth. We need to check them all. I'll go to Damascus. Some of my father's disciples will go to the other 3 cities. A solemn expression crossed Kara's face, and she murmured, as though thinking aloud, Maulana is writing verses. They are beautiful. Shams's absence is turning him into a poet. Dropping her gaze to the Persian carpet, her cheeks moist, her round mouth pouting, Kara sighed, and then she recited the following: I have seen the king with a face of glory, he who is the eye and the sun of heaven. There was something in the air now that wasn't there a moment ago. I could see that Kara was torn deep inside. One had only to look at her face to understand how it pained her to watch her husband suffer. She was ready to do anything in her power just to see him smile again. And yet she was equally relieved, almost glad, to have finally gotten rid of Shams. What if I cannot find him? I heard myself ask. Then there won't be much to do. We will continue with our lives as before, she remarked, a sparkle of hope flickering in her eyes. At that moment I understood in all clarity and beyond doubt what she insinuated. I didn't have to find Shams of Tabriz. I didn't even have to go to Damascus. I could leave Konya tomorrow, wander for a while, find myself a nice roadside inn to stay at, and come back a few weeks later, pretending to have looked for Shams everywhere. My father would trust my word, and the subject would be dropped forever. Perhaps that would be best, not only for Kara and Aladdin, who had always been suspicious of Shams, but also for my father's students and disciples, and even for me. Kara, I said, what shall I do? And this woman who had converted to Islam to marry my father, who had been a wonderful mother to me and my brother, and who loved her husband so much she memorized the poems he wrote for someone else, gave me a pained look and said nothing. Suddenly she had no more words inside her. I had to find the answer for myself. Rumi. Konya, August 1246. Barren is the world, devoid of sun, since Shams is gone. This city is a sad, cold place, and my soul is empty. I can't sleep at night, and during the day I only wander around. I am here and I am not here, a ghost among people. I can't help feeling cross at everyone. How can they go on living their lives as if nothing has changed? How can life be the same without Shams of Tabriz? Every day from dusk to dawn, I sit in the library on my own and think of nothing but Shams. I remember what he, with a touch of harshness in his voice, had once told me: someday you will be the voice of love. I don't know about that, but it is true that I find silence painful these days. Words give me openings to break through the darkness in my heart. This was what Shams had wanted all along, wasn't it, to make a poet out of me? Life is about perfection. Every incident that happens, no matter how colossal or small, and every hardship that we endure is an aspect of a divine plan that works to that end. Struggle is intrinsic to being human. That is why it says in the Quran, certainly we will show our ways to those who struggle on our way. There is no such thing as coincidence in God's scheme. And it was no coincidence that Shams of Tabriz crossed my path on that day in October almost 2 years ago. I didn't come to you because of the wind, Shams had said. And then he had told me a story. Once there was a Sufi master who was so knowledgeable that he had been given the breath of Jesus. He had only one student, and he was quite happy with what he was given. But his disciple was of a different mind. In his desire to see everyone else marvel at the powers of his master, he kept begging him to take on more followers. All right, the master finally agreed. If it will make you happy, I'll do as you say. They went to the market that day. In one of the stalls, there were bird-shaped candies. As soon as the master blew upon them, the birds came alive and flew away with the wind. Speechless, the townspeople immediately gathered around him with admiration. From that day on, everyone in town was singing the master's praises. Soon there were so many followers and admirers around him that his old disciple couldn't see him much anymore. "Oh, master, I was wrong. It was much better in the old days," the disciple moaned forlornly. "Do something. Make them all go away, please." "All right. If it will make you happy, I'll shoo them away." The next day while he was preaching, the master broke wind. His followers were appalled. One by one, they turned and walked away from him. Only his old disciple remained. "Why didn't you leave with the others?" the master asked. And the disciple answered, "I didn't come to you because of the first wind, nor would I leave you because of the last. Everything Shams did, he did for my perfection." This is what the townspeople could never understand. Shams deliberately fanned the flames of gossip, touched raw nerves, and spoke words that sounded like blasphemy to ordinary ears, shocking and provoking people, even those who loved him. He threw my books into water, forcing me to unlearn all that I knew. Though everyone had heard that he was critical of sheikhs and scholars, very few people knew how capable of tafsir he was. Shams had deep knowledge in alchemy, astrology, astronomy, theology, philosophy, and logic, but he kept his knowledge hidden from ignorant eyes. Though he was a faqih, he acted as if he were a fakir. He opened our doors to a prostitute and made us share our food with her. He sent me to the tavern and encouraged me to talk to drunks. Once he made me beg across from the mosque where I used to preach, forcing me to put myself in the shoes of a leper beggar. He cut me off first from my admirers, then from the ruling elite, bringing me in touch with the common people. Thanks to him I came to know persons I would have otherwise never met. In his belief that all idols that stood between the individual and God had to be demolished, including fame, wealth, rank, and even religion, Shams cut loose all the moorings that tied me to life as I knew it. Wherever he saw any kind of mental boundary, a prejudice, or a taboo, he took the bull by the horns and confronted it. For him I went through trial and tests, states, and stages, each of which made me look more deranged in the eyes of even my most loyal followers. Before, I had plenty of admirers, now I have gotten rid of the need for an audience. Blow after blow, Shams managed to ruin my reputation. Because of him I learned the value of madness and have come to know the taste of loneliness, helplessness, slander, seclusion, and, finally, heartbreak. Whatever you see as profitable, flee from it. Drink poison and pour away the water of life. Abandon security and stay in frightful places. Throw away reputation, become disgraced and shameless. At the end of the day, aren't we are all put on trial every day, every passing minute. God asks us, do you remember the covenant we made before you were sent to this world? Do you understand your role in revealing my treasure? Most of the time, we are not ready to answer these questions. They are too frightening. But God is patient. He asks again and again. And if this heartache, too, is part of a trial. My only wish is to find Shams at the end of it. My books, sermons, family, wealth, or name, I am ready to give up anything and everything, just to see his face one more time. The other day Kara said I was turning into a poet, almost despite myself. Though I have never thought highly of poets, I wasn't surprised to hear that. At any other time, I might have objected to what she said, but not anymore. My mouth is spewing out lines of poetry, constantly and involuntarily, and, listening to them, one might conclude that I am becoming a poet indeed. The Sultan of language. But the truth, insofar as I am able to tell, is that the poems do not belong to me. I am only a vehicle for letters that are placed in my mouth. Like a pen that writes down the words it is ordered to inscribe, or a flute that plays the notes blown into it, I, too, am simply doing my part. Marvelous son of Tabriz. Where are you, Shams? Damascus, April 1247. By the time spring was in full swing in Damascus, and 10 months had passed since my departure from Konya, Sultan Walid found me. Under a clear blue sky, I was playing chess with a Christian hermit named Francis. He was a man whose inner equilibrium did not tilt easily, a man who knew the meaning of submission. And since Islam means the inner peace that comes from submission, to me Francis was more Muslim than many who claim to be so. For it is one of the 40 rules, submission does not mean being weak or passive. It leads to neither fatalism nor capitulation. Just the opposite. True power resides in submission, a power that comes from within. Those who submit to the divine essence of life will live in unperturbed tranquility and peace even when the whole wide world goes through turbulence after turbulence. I moved my vizier in order to force Francis's king to shift position. With a quick and brave decision, he moved his rook. I had begun to suspect I was going to lose this game when I lifted my head and came eye to eye with Sultan Walid. "Nice to see you," I said. "So you have decided to look for me after all." He gave me a rueful smile, then turned somber, surprised to hear that I was aware of the internal struggle he had been through. But being the honest man that he was, he didn't deny the truth. "I spent some time wandering around instead of looking for you. But after a while I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't bring myself to lie to my father. I came to Damascus and started looking for you, but you weren't easy to find. You are an honest man and a good son," I said. "One day soon you'll be a great companion to your father." Sultan Walid shook his head dolefully. "You are the only companion he needs. I want you to come back to Konya with me. My father needs you." Many things churned in my brain upon hearing this invitation, and none of them were clear at first. My nafs reacted with fear at the idea of going back to a place where I was clearly